I'm Shahar Azani, and I'm pleased to join David Harris on Defending Israel. This has been a tough week in Israel's fight against Hamas's terror in Gaza. It's been a week in which the IDF lost in one day 24 IDF soldiers. 24 IDF soldiers who were killed in battle against the vile terrorist organization Hamas. We always say, he who saves a soul saves the world entire, and he who loses one loses a world entire. It's a moment of great pain for so many in our people, in the state of Israel, and around the world. When we think about those lost, we think about those families, those mothers, children, the widows. I want to share one letter written by one of those soldiers who perished this week, Elkanah Wiesel, 35-year-old reservist, father of four, who left a letter to his family. A letter which reads as follows. If you are reading these words, something must have happened to me. First of all, I want to make it clear. In case Hamas abducted me, I demand that no deal is made for the release of any terrorist to release me. Our victory is more important than anything. I may have fallen in battle, and whenever a soldier is lost in battle, is killed in battle, it's a sad moment. But I do ask all of you to rejoice. Don't be sad. Sing a lot. Hold each other's hand and hold on to each other. There is so much that we can be happy for. We are the generation of redemption. We are writing as we speak the most meaningful moments in the history of our people and the world. Continue to choose life, life of love, of hope, of purity, and of optimism. Incredible words, right, David?
Powerful, poignant, and I want to say for our viewers, Shahar, that in American terms, as the U.S. is about 35 times larger than Israel, 24 soldiers lost in one day in Israel would mean over 800 soldiers lost in America. So I want the JBS viewing audience to understand the magnitude of this and how many people in Israel have been touched directly by the deaths of these 24 heroic, and I don't use the term lightly, Shahar, heroic Israeli soldiers defending the state, defending our people, and I would argue defending the West and our value system against jihadist, extremist terrorists.
Yeah, and you know, we're talking about the battle that Israel is waging, and we're also talking about the battle that we are waging outside of Israel, and that's the battle for global, public opinion, influencing the conversation. And there is so much ignorance and animosity that we're surrounded with. And we've mentioned it briefly in the past, but I wanted to take the opportunity today and dive with you into some of the tough questions that people might be facing out there, might be encountering, whether individually or they may counter it on social media with various videos of people who are posting it. And I want to ask you, David, ceasefire sounds like a lovely expression. How can anyone object to ceasing fire, to ceasing hostilities, to stopping the war and the bloodshed and the suffering on both sides? Why really not go for a ceasefire and answer the demands of the masses out there? What's wrong with that argument?
What's wrong with the argument, Shahar, is very simply the nature of the other side, of the enemy, of Hamas. There was a ceasefire on the 6th of October. It was not the first ceasefire, but there it was. And once again, as in the past, when it was convenient for Hamas, when they felt ready, they broke the ceasefire with impunity. So another ceasefire now, or to use the more precise term, a permanent ceasefire, Shahar, is an oxymoron. There can be no permanent ceasefire with an enemy like Hamas. A permanent ceasefire between two democracies is one thing. But with Hamas, what? So Hamas lives another day to plan the next attack, to build the next terror tunnel, to accumulate the next missiles. That's the problem here. If Hamas remains powerful and standing, Dollars to donuts, Shahar, to use an old American expression. There'll be more rounds of attacks, more rounds of invasion, more diversion of humanitarian assistance from Gaza to Hamas. This will go on, and Israel will be forced to respond again and again. No, a ceasefire is not the solution.
So, under this assumption, David, the only path forward that you see, and correct me if I'm wrong, is perpetual war?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Let's remember, Shahar, let's dial back to October 6th, which seems not like a few months ago, but a few centuries ago.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's funny you're mentioning it, David. Just the other day, I was scrolling through my phone and I saw a photo I took on October 6th, and I truly felt like I was a different person.
We all were. We all were. But until October 6th, there was another story. And that story was of Saudi Arabia and Israel. How far were the talks? How much did we not see but was going on under the table? When might there be a normalization agreement between the two countries? What other countries might be in the wings? Several other Middle Eastern and North African countries were being mentioned, Shahar. So, permanent war? Absolutely not. There are forces in the region, in North Africa and the Middle East, that seek peace and coexistence with Israel. And in the last few years alone, we went from 2 Arab countries, Egypt and Jordan, to 6 Arab countries that had openly signed deals with Israel. And again, I stress, the Israeli Prime Minister had visited Saudi Arabia. I mean, that's not a small deal. There were reports, unfortunately leaked to the media, that the Israeli Foreign Minister had met with his counterpart in Libya. So, the notion that war is inevitable, I think is completely wrong. How do we drive forward the expanding circle of peace and coexistence at the expense of the Iran-led coalition that talks about, yes, permanent war, the annihilation of Israel, and the domination of the entire region by Iran and the Muslim Brotherhood and jihadism?
But David, let me push a little bit on that.
Push.
You're talking about the greater Middle East. And I understand and I'm hearing you, but there are many people out there, and again, I'm playing devil's advocate here, who will come and tell you, you're saying nothing about what's happening in Gaza. You're saying you're giving no hope to the innocent people in Gaza, to ordinary Palestinians in Gaza who are suffering, who will come and tell you that they're dying en masse, according to the Ministry of Health in Gaza or other information that's being cited out there. What do you tell those people about the future of ordinary Gazans? Is the future of Gazans will be perpetual war? Because you're saying that Israel is unwilling to think about a ceasefire.
Look, number one, Shahar, we have to face reality, unpleasant as it is. Hamas has led Gaza since 2007. As of 2024, that is 17 consecutive years. In polling done by Palestinians since October the 7th, 75% or more, and not just in Gaza but in the West Bank, support what Hamas has done. So I don't pretend that this is easy, but in your question as a devil's advocate, the assumption is that the entire burden of this is on Israel. And I'm saying the entire burden of this is not on Israel alone. It is principally on the choices made by Palestinians. They can't have it both ways. If they want to pursue the annihilation of Israel, whether on the battlefield or from the bleachers, there's a price to be paid. Actions have consequences. You start a war as Hamas did, then don't go whining to the world complaining about the consequences of the war. You complain about civilian casualties, believe me, I get it, especially when it comes to children. I feel it deeply. But if Hamas embeds all of its assets in civilian locations, residential buildings, schools, mosques, hospitals, ambulances, then it's unavoidable. So the question really becomes, When will the Palestinian people make a choice not for war and terrorism, but for peace and coexistence? I don't see it happening in the current generation, either in the West Bank with Mahmoud Abbas or with Hamas, but I don't exclude it. And I also, Shahar, and I think this is terribly important, I also don't exclude a more active role in the future by Egypt and Jordan and the UAE and Saudi Arabia, joining forces with the United States and the European Union to try and come up with a more ambitious, creative, and comprehensive plan, which includes the Palestinians, but also looks to big issues like Saudi-Israeli relations. I'm not saying it'll work, Shahar, but if people are thinking short-sightedly now about a ceasefire, they're entirely missing the boat. The ceasefire, as I said, is not serious. It will not hold. It assures future violence by Hamas. We have to look beyond and more creatively, but Americans love immediate solutions. You know,
right.
I want to lose 50 pounds in 30 days. I want to become a millionaire overnight. I want to learn Chinese in 2 weeks. In the real world in the Middle East, it's going to take more than that, but we can't give up.
So when some of the questions that people encounter out there, and I want to quote a has-been actress, Susan Sarandon, who said the issue in Gaza did not start on October 7th, meaning there is an issue here of context. Let's look at the overall picture, they'll come and tell you, David.
Beautiful word,
they'll
context.
Talk about context, and they'll talk about the blockade. They'll talk about the fact that Palestinians in Gaza did not have the freedom to build their own airport, to have their own seaport, to even exercise free fishing in their waters. So under this kind of what they call smothering occupation and continuous blockade, this option, and again, just playing devil's advocate here and things that are stated out there, legitimate resistance, or even if not legitimate, then an expression of a profound frustration with their back against the wall, seeing no hope in their future. How do you view that argument, David?
Shahar, number one, whether Susan Sarandon is a good or bad actor, I leave it to others to judge. But being an actress with some degree of fame does not make her a geopolitical specialist. So frankly speaking, I couldn't care less what Susan Sarandon and people like her think. To me, it's irrelevant, though I get it. She's a celeb. Some people may follow her. But it completely misses the boat, Shahar. It's an expression of what some have called the racism of low expectations. Palestinians are incapable of agency. They're incapable of taking responsibility for themselves and the consequences of their own actions. Again, I use the word consequences. To repeat from many conversations, number one, Gaza was never in history a free, self-ruled country. It was occupied for century after century by Ottoman Turkey, by others, including the Egyptians. Israel, ironically, Susan Sarandon, is the first occupying nation that withdrew completely and gave Gaza the chance to rule itself. And over Egyptian, Israeli, and even Palestinian Authority objections, the United States insisted in 2006 that Hamas be included in the elections. They were elected, and whatever they didn't get through elections, they completed through violence and ousted the Palestinian Authority. But they have been in charge with no Israelis on the ground, neither soldier nor settler, since 2005. They have been in charge. They are responsible.
What about the blockade, David?
The blockade, first of all, Shahar, ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't consulted a map lately, please look at a map. Gaza has two, I repeat, two borders, not one. The media will never tell you that. Susan Sarandon will never tell you that. Bella and Gigi Hadad will never tell you that. Mehdi Hassan will never tell you that. Jeremy Corbyn will never tell you that. The UN will never tell you that. But Egypt, a fellow majority Muslim and Arab country, borders Gaza. Egypt makes its own independent decisions vis-a-vis Gaza. Israel does not control what Egypt does. Why does Egypt impose a blockade on Gaza? An interesting question, Shahar, that no one seems to ask in public. Because Egypt itself is as fearful of the Muslim Brotherhood-inspired extremism of Gaza and doesn't want the spillover. Number 3, Shahar, when Israel left Gaza, and I said it at the time in writing, others did as well, no country on earth had a greater stake in Gaza's development, peaceful development, than Israel. Israel and friends like me said from the outset, let Gaza become the new Singapore of the Middle East.
Very true.
The size is roughly the same. Singapore has no natural resources except brains and visionary leadership. So Gaza chose the path of Hamas and terror and terrorist tunnels and missiles and rockets and alignment with Iran, and then whines to the public about the consequences, again, of their own decisions. That's what's called in English reverse causality, Shahar.
Right.
I do something to provoke you, you respond to me, and then I point the finger at you and say, Shahar, you're hitting me, you're boycotting me. And lastly, let me ask the question, why should Israel, targeted by Hamas in its charter, in its speeches, in its language for annihilation, why should Israel now become the only Christian nation on earth, so to speak, by turning the cheek and extending the helping hand to Hamas-ruled Gaza? We see, Shahar, what happens when the UN brings in aid to Gaza. When civilians are denied food or fuel or water, Hamas has not denied them. Hamas has hijacked them. There's enough fuel for thousands of missiles and rockets, Shahar. They don't build themselves and fire themselves. So why isn't Susan Sarandon confronting Hamas and saying, if you're serious about Palestinian aspirations, you want to build a free society in Gaza, not at the expense of Israel, but in Gaza, this is not the way to go about it. But Susan Sarandon is ideologically programmed. She's not willing to see beyond the four walls of her dogma. And that's why we're talking about her right now.
Yep. It's actually, that understanding of the blockade being just a slogan that has nothing behind it. It reminds me of one more thing when it comes to Gaza, a fact that so many people forgot. So many of the structures in Gaza today were built by Israel in the course of Israel's control over the Gaza Strip, including, by the way, Ashifa Hospital and many residential neighborhoods that Israel built for Palestinians. So that's also an important point to at least bear in mind. But I wanna ask you, David, if the truth and the facts, and this is a question that comes up a lot, is on Israel's side. You mentioned Mehdi Hassan and others. Why don't we see that image reflected in international media, in the general debate? Where has that truth gone hiding, and why? And what can we do out there to make a difference?
Shahar, first of all, to add to what you said a moment ago, Israel, and by the way, American Jewish supporters made a special point of preserving the greenhouses that had been used on Israeli farming in Gaza as a gesture to help jumpstart the Gazan economy. Again, to my point, no one had a greater stake in Gaza's peaceful development than Israel, its permanent neighbor. You can change clothes, you can change cities, you can't change neighbors. Gaza and Israel are destined to live next to each other. As for the other question, I think it comes down to a few pretty obvious things. First of all, I have to say it, we've discussed it before, but I have to repeat it, Shahar. There is a deeply embedded anti-Semitism in some important parts of the world and in some venerable institutions. so-called venerable institutions, and we are seeing it play out right now. Shahar, the fact that there's indisputable evidence about rape, gang rape, mutilation, murder of women, and the fact that every significant women's organization, Me Too movement organization, UN Women, has remained silent. Or if it dared to speak, it spoke in such a carefully manicured way that you lost the thrust. What can explain this, Shahar? I mean, this is not a dispute about whether or not it happened. It happened. Children have been murdered. Children have been kidnapped. Where is the world's outcry? Where are the children's organizations? Why? Well, they're enveloped in ideological dogma. Israel the oppressor, Israel the white nation, Israel the colonizer, Israel the supremacist nation. All of this empty, woke, insane, symbolic language. But examined, not unexamined, Shahar, examined, all of this is ridiculous. All of this is unfounded. But the dogmatic people are on autopilot, Shahar. You can't have a rational discussion with Susan Sarandon or Mehdi Hassan or Jeremy Corbyn because they're programmed in such a way that they're not listening, they're not open to new ideas. Don't confuse me with the facts or your truths. So the problem is we have ideology, dogma, and anti-Semitism married to one another here. Israel demonically portrayed as a result. And if tomorrow Israel came up with a cure for pancreatic cancer, one of the worst cancers we all know, I guarantee you that this crowd and their cheerleaders would reject the cure, question the cure, accuse it of being another Israeli conspiracy to affect the health of decent people around the world. They're blinded, Shahar. So our goal is not to convince them. Our goal has to be to isolate them and simply tell the most powerful weapon we have, the truth, the unvarnished truth. I'm not here to say that Israel is a perfect country, that Israel has never made a mistake in its life, that it won't make more mistakes, Shahar. But Israel is a good, decent, peace-seeking country, and Hamas is an Iran-supported jihadist, misogynist, homophobic, anti-Semitic terrorist group that threatens Israel first. But Susan Sarandon and company, whatever happens to Israel, they're coming for us next, and you're part of that.
Your part. You know, what you just said, David, is one of the most important lessons that I want our viewers to pay a very good attention to. You said we're not going to convince these people. We need to isolate them. What you're telling us, and I want you to expand on this for a second, choose your audience. You're not going to be able to convince some elements, the radical elements that stand against Israel. Choose your audience. Think who you're speaking to and when you put your energy, correct?
Absolutely. Look, we're in the presidential season again in the United States. It seems like every season is presidential season, but we're really in it now. When Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley debated each other before the Iowa primary, or when the Democrat and Republican will debate before the November election, they're not trying to convince each other. Joe Biden was not trying to convince Donald Trump in 2020, stand down, Donald, I'm the better president. You know what, Joe? You're right. I'm standing down. Good luck to you. It's all yours. No. But we spend too much time. Who gives forgive me, a damn about the Susan Sarandons, again, the people we've named before? There are lots of good people out there, Shahar, who don't wake up every morning thinking Middle East and go to sleep every night thinking Middle East. They're good people. They're decent people. And those people need to know that this is a just war by Israel that was started by Hamas, whose explicit goal is the annihilation of the state of Israel. That Israel is not a supremacist nation. Israel is a democratic and pluralistic nation. It's not a white nation. It is a nation largely of people from the Middle East, from North Africa, from Ethiopia, from many other countries, not to mention Christians and Muslims. It's not a colonizing nation. Lord knows, maybe literally as well as figuratively, Shahar, Lord knows, Jews are an indigenous people of the region. They didn't start in Brooklyn or Bialystok. And there would be no Christian Bible. There would be no Jesus if there had not been Jews as an indigenous people 2,000 years ago and more. So why are we on the defensive? Why are we wasting our time speaking to the wrong people? The majority of Americans will understand and embrace and support if the arguments are made to them, rather than screaming and yelling at people who are immovable, who are blinded, who are dogmatic, and who detest anything about Israel and the Jewish people.
One of the most important points that I'm so happy that you're stating it, and I hope that everybody hears it, including students on college campuses when they think about coming together and engagement. I want to ask you one last question and go back to that devil's advocate element, an issue that keeps on coming up. We were talking about the two-state solution before, and we mentioned what the trajectory of peace. What kind of hope, somebody might ask you, David, are you offering Palestinians in general, not just in Gaza, but also in Judea and Samaria? What kind of future are you offering them when we're seeing this kind of war taking place in Gaza, and when the Israeli leadership, and to a degree, a majority of the Israeli public, says no to Palestinian state or sovereignty? What's the future going to be for these people?
Shahar, first of all, I need to make it clear, although I hope it's been clear, I'm not the Israeli government. I'm not a spokesperson for this or any Israeli government. And it's not for me, on behalf of Israel, to speak about future plans. There are other Americans who have that I would call it arrogance, to speak for Israel as if Israel can't speak for itself. Israel can speak for itself. It knows how to defend itself, and it's proven through 6 peace and normalization deals that it knows how to achieve peace as well. But more broadly speaking, there were attempts at peace. There were attempts at two-state solution. This is not a novel idea, Shahar. This idea began as early as 1937 with the British Mandate and the Peel Commission, and then 1947 with the UN Partition Plan approved by the General Assembly. I would add, Shahar, that from 1948, Israel's rebirth, until 1967, the Yom Kippur War, Gaza, the West Bank, Eastern Jerusalem were in Arab hands, Shahar, not Israeli. They could have created a Palestinian state any day of the week. So, to the Palestinian people, I think it's fair to say that Israel yearns for peace, true peace, enduring peace, more than any nation on earth. Why? Because it's never had one true day of peace, Shahar. But in order to achieve peace, there have to be historic compromises, not by one side, but by both sides. Israel has shown that in exchange for genuine offers of peace from Egypt, from Jordan, by the way, from the UAE, that Israel will go far. It will go very far in offering tangible concessions, not verbal, tangible concessions. But if anyone expects Israel to vanish or to agree to a suicide pact, though I'm not an Israeli government spokesman, think again. It simply ain't going to happen.
And one of the underlying points that you're making here is that, yes, people can come to supporters of Israel, and say, what's going to be with the Palestinians? But I go back to one of the main points that you mentioned, David. Sometimes it's about the Palestinians. They need to be the ones taking responsibility for their own fate, taking charge of their own destiny, rather than failing miserably the way they have in Gaza.
Bingo, Shahar. But for that, Palestinians have to take their fate into their own hands and not outsource it to leaders. If you seek peace, choose leadership that reflects that goal. The negotiations won't be easy, they never are. But at the end of the day, if both sides are sincere and committed, Shahar, the peace we have with Egypt and with Jordan and with the UAE and with Bahrain and Morocco and Sudan, and I hope one day with Saudi Arabia and Oman and Mauritania, can also be a peace with the Palestinians, the most important neighbor Israel has.
Agreed. David, I want to thank you so much for today's conversation, because it's been not only practical by giving the tools to our viewers to engage on this topic in a clear, commonsensical manner, but also very hopeful and inspirational in understanding what it is that we truly stand for. I thank you for the direction, for the path, for the wisdom that you share with us all.
It's my pleasure, Shahar. Thank you.
And like we said at the beginning of today's show, these are trying times for so many of us, especially this week. And the only way we can get through them is, as we always do, together. May we see better times soon, as we always conclude, David. Israel
Chai.
Thank you so much for watching, and see you again soon.